They were scared. 32 German women trapped in a small, dark barracks, their hands gripping whatever they could find, broken broomsticks, sharpened spoons, anything to defend themselves. Rumors had warned them. The Americans were cruel, they said, merciless to women. The sound of boots on the wooden floor grew closer, echoing through the tense silence. But what happened next shocked them all. The door opened, and instead of weapons, the Americans brought something completely unexpected. Warm blankets, steaming cups of tea, and hands ready to help. No chains, no anger, just care. What really happened that morning changed everything these women believed about their enemies, and it's a story you won't forget. If you want to see the full story of courage, fear, and unexpected humanity, hit like, subscribe, and support the channel. Don't forget to watch till the end. These hidden moments of history need to be remembered. The train rolled into the Texas station just after sunrise, metal wheels grinding softly as it slowed. For the German women inside, the sound felt like a warning. Many had not slept. They sat with their backs straight, fingers tight around their small bags. Some still wore pieces of their old auxiliary uniforms. Others had coats stitched from blankets. They had been told many things about Americans, most of them frightening. Some believed they would be punished. Others believed they might be put on display. A few quietly repeated the same thought. They will not treat us as humans. But when the doors opened, the air smelled different from anything they expected. It smelled of warm dust, dry grass, and distant cooking food. Soldiers waited on the platform, not with rifles raised, but with clipboards. One officer simply said, "Welcome to Camp Hearn Medical Station. Please step down carefully." His voice was calm, almost polite. That politeness itself felt like a contradiction. A tall woman named Ilsa later wrote, "I did not trust the smile of the man who helped me off the train. I thought it was a trick." Her words reflected what all of them felt. Fear mixed with disbelief. They were marched in small groups toward a row of white tents. These were U.S. Army medical structures, simple canvas but carefully organized. Generators hummed. A metal basin clanged as a nurse set it down. Nearby, a surgical team prepared for the morning procedures. The women could smell carbolic cleaner and fresh bandages. It reminded some of hospitals back home, but without the chaos and shortages. Inside the intake tent, the shift was immediate. A doctor in a clean white coat lifted his gaze and said, "Next, please." His tone carried no anger, no excitement, only routine professionalism. This confused the prisoners more than shouting would have. The Americans began basic checks: pulse, temperature, wounds, infections. They recorded height and weight. And here, another shock appeared. Many of the women were underweight. Army medical officers later calculated that the average German female POW arriving from Europe had lost nearly 20–25% of her normal body weight. Numbers do not convey suffering, but these statistics told a quiet truth. Most of them had endured hunger for a long time. When one woman fainted during the exam, a nurse caught her before she fell. She was given water, then a small cup of broth. She whispered, "Are you helping me?" The nurse simply nodded. That nod carried more power than a speech. It was the first moment when fear cracked open. But fear did not disappear. Not yet. When the women were separated for deeper medical checks, some cried, thinking it was punishment. Yet what followed was another surprise. Instead of threats, the Americans prepared X-rays, clean instruments, and proper beds. Some machines hissed softly. Others clicked like typewriters. The unfamiliar sounds made the atmosphere tense, but nothing painful happened. The staff explained each step, slowly, with gestures, to avoid confusion. One prisoner, Marta, had a severe stomach condition. She had hidden it for weeks because she believed an enemy doctor would make things worse. When the American surgeon examined her, he paused, then said the line that would echo across the camp. "You're operating on me?" she asked, trembling. "Yes," he answered, "and we are going to fix this." That was the paradox at the heart of their new reality. The enemy they feared was treating them with more care than many German hospitals could offer at the end of the war. Outside the tent, Trucks delivered supplies. Each crate was neatly labeled. One U.S. quartermaster noted that a single American POW hospital could use over 300 pounds of medical textiles in a week, far more than German facilities had available in 1945. Abundance itself became a form of communication. It told the women without words that the war they believed they understood was far bigger and more uneven than they had been taught. As the examinations continued, their fear slowly turned to confusion. Confusion later shifted to curiosity, but understanding would take time. For now, the women stepped out of the intake tent and into the sunlight, holding new blankets and small medical cards. The wind felt warm on their faces. Nothing made sense yet, but the story of how an enemy surgeon earned their trust had just begun. The intake was only the beginning. The real shock came when the women were led into the examination wing, a long, bright tent with metal tables, soft lamps, and the steady tap of instruments being arranged. Many of the German women froze at the entrance. They had expected a dark room, harsh guards, maybe punishment. Instead, they saw organization and calm. A nurse held out a tray of clean cloth gowns. "Please change so the doctor can examine you," she said gently. The women looked at one another. Changing clothes in front of the enemy felt impossible, but the Americans had set up small curtains between beds, giving privacy, something many German military hospitals no longer offered in the final months of the war. "Why do they care?" whispered Anna, one of the youngest prisoners. No one had an answer. Inside the tent, everything smelled of antiseptic and metal. The air felt cooler, controlled. Each sound seemed important. The click of scissors, the gentle hum of an X-ray machine, the soft footsteps of medical staff moving quickly, but without panic. For women who had lived through months of shortages, bombed-out clinics and rushed treatments, the quiet efficiency felt unreal. The surgeon in charge, Captain Robert Alden, moved slowly from table to table. His sleeves were rolled, his gloves tight, his hair covered by a cap. He did not raise his voice. He did not push or rush anyone. He simply examined one patient, washed his hands again, and moved to the next. To the women, he looked like an image from a medical textbook, not like the enemy they had imagined. Numbers on his chart told a painful truth. Nearly 60% of the new arrivals suffered from anemia. Over half had infections or untreated wounds. Several had internal problems caused by poor food and extreme stress. The statistics were clinical, but the meaning was clear. These women were not soldiers in strong condition. They were exhausted humans who needed help. The moment that changed everything came when Marta was taken to the main table. Her stomach pain had grown worse, and she tried to hide it again. But Captain Alden noticed immediately. He pressed gently on her abdomen, then stepped back with a concerned look. "You need surgery," he said calmly. She stared at him. "You're operating on me?" "Yes," he answered. "We will take care of you." His certainty, his absence of anger, and the simple humanity in his tone made the room go silent. Another prisoner later wrote, "It felt strange. I believed I should fear him, yet he looked at me the way a doctor looks at any patient." The surgical team prepared quickly. Lights were adjusted, tools laid out in a perfect line. A nurse checked Marta's pulse and explained each step in simple English, repeating slowly until she understood. Marta kept asking the same question. "Why are you helping me?" The nurse finally replied, "Because you are sick. That is enough." While the surgery team worked, the other women watched from their beds. Some held their blankets tight, unsure whether to trust what they were seeing. Others whispered their confusion. They knew German propaganda had said American soldiers were brutal, careless, interested only in humiliation. But this scene, clean, orderly, professional, contradicted everything. Outside, the heat of the Texas sun pressed on the canvas walls. Trucks passed on the nearby road, carrying medical supplies, fuel, and crates of fresh bandages. An American logistic report from that year stated that U.S. Army hospitals used nearly 2,000 pounds of medical cotton every month, a level of supply no German facility could match in 1945. Even abundance felt like a message. You are safe. You will not be harmed here. When the surgery ended, Marta was wheeled out slowly. She was pale but alive. The surgeon gave instructions to the nurse, then moved to the next patient without ceremony. For him, it was routine. For the women watching, it felt like the world had flipped. "I think they see us as people," whispered Ilse. Her voice was unsure, almost afraid of its own meaning. The sun dipped lower. The medical tent glowed softly as lamps switched on one by one. The women lay on their beds, quiet, thinking. Their fear had changed shape. It no longer came from danger. It came from the shock of kindness, a kindness they had never expected. This wasn't propaganda, it was reality, and it was only the beginning of the transformation waiting for them at the camp. After the medical exams, the women were guided toward another row of tents. These looked different. Steam drifted from the roofs and water tanks sat beside them. The German women walked slowly, unsure what awaited them next. Some feared another inspection, others worried about being separated again. But when a US corporal opened the tent flap, warm air rolled out, along with the smell of soap, a bathhouse. For a moment, no one moved. Many had not seen hot running water for months. A few whispered to each other in disbelief. One woman covered her mouth and said, "This cannot be for us." But it was. Inside, the room was bright and surprisingly warm. Rows of individual stalls stood in neat lines. Wooden benches held small piles of towels. A nurse pointed gently and said, "You can shower one at a time. Take your time." This simple sentence carried more kindness than anything they had heard in weeks. Several women stepped forward but stopped again, still unsure. In Germany, especially in the final months of the war, water had been rationed. Many towns had no fuel for heating. Even military hospitals often washed patients with cold buckets. The idea of clean, hot water running freely felt unreal. One of the women, Greta, later wrote, "I touched the water pipe because I could not believe it was warm. It felt like touching another world." The Americans had prepared everything. Small bars of white soap lay ready. Fresh towels were folded. A sign listed instructions in simple English, followed by hand-drawn pictures so the prisoners could understand. Wash, rinse, dry, dress. No shouting, no rushing, only order and dignity. When the first woman stepped into a stall and turned the handle, a burst of hot water hit the floor. She gasped. The sound of falling water filled the tent, steady and soft. For the others, that sound alone felt healing. One by one, they bathed. Steam rose, filling the space with warmth. The scent of soap, plain, clean, unfamiliar, floated in the air. Some of the women cried quietly, not from pain, but from relief. They had not realized how heavy the dirt, sweat, and fear had become until it started washing away. Outside the bathhouse, another surprise waited: food. Long tables were set under a shaded awning, and metal trays had been placed neatly along the wood. When the women approached, they saw bowls of rice, cooked vegetables, and small servings of chicken stew. It wasn't luxury food, but it was warm, filling, and full of flavor, far better than the thin rations they had survived on in Europe. An American cook lifted a ladle and said, "Step up, one at a time." He spoke in an easy tone, like it was a normal lunch line. In truth, this simple routine revealed something powerful. The US Army had enough supplies to feed thousands every day. Allied logistics reports from 1945 recorded millions of pounds of rice, beans, and canned meats shipped monthly to American bases. The women, who sometimes had gone days with only bread crusts, felt the contrast instantly. They sat at the wooden tables, eating slowly. Many held their spoons for a long time before taking the first bite. They seemed unsure if they were allowed to enjoy it. Then came small reactions: a sigh of relief, a quiet smile, a whispered, "It tastes good." These small voices carried big meaning. Ilse, who rarely showed emotion, said softly, "I had forgotten what warm food feels like inside the body." The soldiers preparing the meals did not stare or threaten. They simply worked, cleaned, and carried trays. For them it was ordinary duty. For the German women, it was a contradiction they could not explain. This was the enemy, yet the enemy fed them. This was the enemy, yet the enemy gave them hot water and clean clothes. This was the enemy, yet the enemy healed them. The contrast grew sharper with each passing hour. After the meal, some of the women were given light chores, sweeping the eating area or helping carry towels. Nothing harsh. The Americans wanted structure, not punishment. Routine helped keep the camp calm. As the sun began to set, the women returned to their barracks. Their hair was clean, their stomachs were full, their bodies felt lighter. For the first time since capture, many of them slept without fear. But deeper questions remained. Why were the Americans treating them this way? What did it mean? And how much of what they once believed was untrue? These thoughts would shape what they discovered next. The small daily moments that would challenge their old ideas even more. The women entered the camp slowly, unsure of what waited for them. Many had imagined rough voices, harsh orders, and a place where they would be treated like enemies. Instead, they found something they did not expect. The camp looked controlled, but not cruel. The buildings were simple, but well built. The paths were clean. The guards watched them, but there was no anger in their eyes. For a moment, the women stood still. They were exhausted, dusty, and hungry. Some carried small bags, others had nothing at all. A few held on to each other because their legs were weak from the long journey. They understood that they were now prisoners, but something about this place felt different from every story they had heard. An American officer stepped forward. His uniform was clean, and his voice was calm. He did not shout. He did not wave his weapon. He simply said, "Welcome to Camp Hearn. You will be processed, then taken to your quarters. No one will harm you here." The women looked at one another, not sure if they could believe him. One woman whispered, "Why is he speaking to us like we are human?" Another shook her head, confused. They had expected punishment, not politeness. The officer continued explaining the rules of the camp. The women would receive meals 3 times a day. They would be allowed to write letters. They would have medical care if they needed it. They would be treated according to the Geneva Convention, words many of them never thought would apply to them. 2 guards guided the group toward a larger building. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant. Long tables were lined with forms, pencils, and identification cards. The women were asked to state their names, ages, and home cities. Everything was recorded carefully. It felt more like a registration office than a prison intake. As they moved down the line, they passed a window that looked out toward another section of the camp. There, they saw something that made several of them stop in shock. American soldiers, men and women, were laughing together near a canteen. A few of the women wore uniforms. They smoked, talked freely, and carried clipboards. They walked where they wished. They spoke openly. They showed no fear. One German woman stared at them with wide eyes. "Women, serving with soldiers?" she whispered. "Working beside men? They are not being punished?" Her voice carried both disbelief and admiration. In Germany, many of these prisoners had been told that American women were wild, disrespectful, or out of control. Instead, the scene in front of them painted a different picture. These American women looked confident, educated, and equal. They worked with authority. No one yelled at them. No one pushed them aside. The German prisoners could hardly look away. Another prisoner spoke softly, almost in awe. They walked like they owned the ground beneath their feet. That single moment broke many of the ideas they once had about life outside Germany. They realized that the world they thought they understood was much bigger, freer, and more complex than they had been taught. After registration, the prisoners were taken to a separate room for a brief health check. A female American nurse approached them. She had a calm smile and a steady presence. She asked each woman simple questions. "Are you injured? Do you need medicine? Are you pregnant? Do you have any allergies?" The German women were shocked again. A nurse, speaking kindly to prisoners, treating them with respect. It did not fit the image they had in their minds. One woman, who had spent months hiding her illness during the war, felt tears rise when the nurse placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "You will get proper food and rest here. You're safe now." Safe. The word sounded almost foreign to them. As they stepped back outside, The sun had risen higher in the sky. The camp looked brighter than before. The sounds of American soldiers at work, from sweeping floors to carrying supplies, felt strangely normal. For the first time since their capture, many of the German women let themselves breathe a little easier. They did not know what the coming weeks would bring. They did not know how life in this camp would truly unfold. But Section 4 marks the moment when their fear began to loosen, replaced by questions they had never dared to ask. What if everything we were told was wrong? What if freedom looked different on the other side of the ocean? And most of all, what if this new world was not their enemy after all? The women were guided toward their new quarters, moving in a slow line across the campgrounds. Each step felt lighter than the last, not because their situation changed, but because the fear that once controlled them was starting to lose strength. Still, they walked carefully, unsure of what came next. As they crossed the camp, they noticed small details that surprised them. American soldiers cleaned their own areas, swept walkways, and carried tools without complaining. There were no angry officers shouting orders every few seconds. Commands were clear, but they were not screamed. Work happened because it needed to be done, not because someone was terrified of punishment. For many of the German women, this was the first time they had seen a military place run with strict structure but without cruelty. Their first destination was a long wooden building with large windows. A guard opened the door and motioned for them to enter. Inside, sunlight filled the room. Rows of simple beds lined the walls, narrow mattresses, clean sheets, and neatly folded blankets. Some women gasped softly. Many had expected filthy floors or overcrowded spaces. Instead, what they saw felt surprisingly orderly and humane. "Each of you will have your own bed," the guard said. "You will store your items under it. Do not move beds without permission." The women nodded. Having their own place to sleep, something basic but personal, felt unexpectedly comforting. They set down their belongings and sat on the edges of their new beds. For the first time in days, they were not standing, marching, or waiting under the threat of danger. They could simply sit. A few closed their eyes and took long breaths. Some whispered quick prayers. Others stared silently at the wooden walls, trying to understand how they had ended up in a place that treated them far better than they had imagined. A senior American sergeant entered. She was a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a confident posture. The room fell quiet when she stepped forward, but instead of delivering harsh orders, she spoke with calm strength. "You will be expected to keep this barracks clean. You will receive food at scheduled times. You will have work assignments based on your skills. Follow the rules, and you will have no problems here." Her tone held firmness, not hostility. To the German women, this was new. A woman giving military instructions without fear, without hesitation, was not something they were used to seeing. Some watched her with curiosity, others with quiet respect. One prisoner leaned toward her friend and whispered, "She speaks like a man, but better. She knows no one will silence her." The friend nodded slowly, amazed. After the briefing, the sergeant left, and a young American soldier arrived with a clipboard. She asked the prisoners about their backgrounds: seamstresses, nurses, cleaners, cooks, farm workers. She wrote everything down carefully, explaining that the camp assigned tasks not to punish them, but to keep daily life functioning smoothly. This was another shock. In their own country, many of the women had been dismissed or ignored unless their work supported the war directly. Here, their everyday skills mattered. Soon, the women were guided outside again. They walked past the kitchen area where the smell of warm bread drifted through the air. They could hear water boiling and dishes clattering. A few of them exchanged hopeful looks. Some had not eaten well in months. Near the kitchen yard, they saw a small group of German male prisoners working under light supervision. The men looked healthy, not starved or beaten. They carried sacks of flour, chopped wood, and cleaned tools. A few even smiled briefly when they saw the newly arrived women. One man raised his hand in a small greeting. A guard didn't punish him for it, which shocked the women even more. They continued walking until they reached a wide open yard with a flagpole at the center. Around it, American soldiers moved with clear routines. Some trained, some repaired equipment. Others sat at tables writing letters. There was no chaos. Everything had purpose, but nothing felt violent or oppressive. The German women stood still, stunned by the normalcy of it all. For years they had lived in a world where war controlled every moment, where fear shaped every decision. Here, inside a prison camp of all places, they found a kind of order. Later, one of the women whispered to another, "He treated us like people, not enemies. I do not understand it." That sentence stayed with her all day. Even the meals were a learning experience. The dining hall smelled of warm bread and boiled vegetables. Rations were simple but filling: beans, potatoes, soup, sometimes a slice of meat. Compared to wartime Germany, where food shortages were constant and bread was stretched with fillers, the meals in camp felt unreal. The women ate quietly at first, unsure if they deserved this, but hunger eventually pushed doubts aside. A new paradox grew. They had prepared themselves for cruelty, yet found a daily life ruled by stability, not fear. One evening, a guard brought them newspapers, old ones worn and folded. The women gathered around, reading slowly. Articles described American factories producing thousands of planes a month, farms harvesting millions of acres of crops, and shipyards building more vessels than any nation in history. These numbers, these cold statistics, overwhelmed them. One woman whispered, "How could we ever win against this? This country builds more in 1 month than we saw in a year." Another studied a photo of American workers, men and women together, operating machines. She stared at the confident faces and finally said, "We thought they were weak, but they have strength in a different way." Their old beliefs continued to crumble. Even conversations with American guards added to that feeling. The guards didn't yell unless needed. They didn't insult them. And in quiet moments, some guards even answered questions. One German woman asked a young American soldier, "Why are you kind to us?" He thought for a moment before replying, "Because the war will end, and when it does, we all go home. No need to carry hate forever." That simple answer carried more weight than he realized. The camp's rules remained firm. Work was expected. Schedules had to be followed, but nothing felt vengeful. The system relied on responsibility, not fear. And day by day, the German women began to understand something important. The power of freedom was not in chaos, but in choice, order, and respect. By the time spring returned and the air grew warm, the women often talked about how different their lives that was firm but not cruel. It was strange, almost upside down. One woman finally said what many were thinking: "This place, it runs on rules, but not on fear." Another added softly, "How is that possible? They are soldiers. We are their prisoners." A third replied, "Maybe their world is not like ours." That thought lingered in their minds as they were guided back inside. They looked around at their surroundings, not with fear now, but with a cautious curiosity. By the end of the day, they understood one thing clearly. Life in this camp would not be easy, but it would not be the nightmare they expected. In fact, it might teach them more about America than any textbook, speech, or wartime rumor ever could. And for the first time, they began to wonder, not with fear, but with a strange, quiet interest. What other surprises does this place hold? The days that followed brought a new rhythm to the German women's lives, steady, structured, and surprisingly calm. Each morning, a bell rang across the camp. The sound was clear and sharp, echoing over the barracks and open yard. The women rose from their beds, folded their blankets, and stepped into the cool morning air. Instead of anger or panic, they felt something they had not felt in years: predictability. Their work assignments soon began. Some were sent to the laundry building, where steam filled the air and warm water splashed against metal sinks. Others sorted uniforms, mended clothes, or cleaned hallways. A few who had medical experience were taken to the infirmary to assist American nurses. This was the most surprising assignment of all. Inside the infirmary, everything smelled of alcohol wipes and soap. Metal trays clicked softly as nurses prepared tools. The women watched in silence at first, unsure what was allowed. Then the head nurse explained their tasks clearly but kindly. Wash cloths, prepare bandages, clean beds, help carry supplies. One German woman, a former nurse named Elsa, could not hide her shock. "You trust us with these items?" she asked. The American nurse shrugged lightly. "Why not? You work. We supervise. Simple." It felt strange. Back home, trust was rare. Here, it seemed normal. But the greatest shock came the day an American surgeon asked 2 German women to help hold instruments during a routine operation on a fellow prisoner. The women froze. They had expected suspicion, not cooperation. Yet the doctor behaved as if this arrangement made perfect sense had become. They no longer jumped at every command. They no longer compared every moment to danger. Instead, they observed the world around them with clearer eyes. A thought formed in many minds, though few said it aloud. America was not what their leaders described. As more months passed, the women realized they were changing, not because they were forced to, but because what they saw every day challenged everything they had been taught. They had arrived as prisoners carrying fear. They were slowly becoming witnesses carrying understanding. When the war finally neared its end, the camp grew quieter. Rumors filled the air. Germany collapsing, cities surrendering, borders breaking. The women listened with heavy hearts, but now the news hit them differently. They no longer felt the blind loyalty they once had. They felt sadness for their families, but also relief that the suffering might finally stop. And so their journey reached its final truth. They had come to America expecting punishment. Instead, they learned lessons about dignity, structure, and humanity, lessons they never expected from the other side of a world at war. They had arrived as conquerors. They left as students. When the last gates finally opened and the German women prepared to return home, they carried more than their few belongings. They carried a new understanding of a world they once feared. Their time in the camp had shown them a different kind of power, quiet, steady, and guided by fairness. It was a power that did not demand loyalty through fear, but earned respect through its consistency and humanity. They had walked into America expecting punishment. They walked out having witnessed a system built on rules, not cruelty, on order, not terror, on respect, not propaganda. And long after the war, many of them would tell their families about the surgeon who treated enemies with steady hands, the nurses who offered clean cloth and calm instructions, and the guards who believed that dignity should never depend on which flag a person once served. These memories shaped their stories for the rest of their lives. And today, when we look back at those moments, one truth becomes clear. The real battles of history are not always fought with weapons, but with choices, small acts of humanity that outlast every war. If you want more stories like this, hidden moments, human surprises, and the truths that history books often miss, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications. There are many more untold stories from World War II waiting to be uncovered. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.